So, any of you who've listened to this podcast for more than a minute know that the one company I talk about the most is Amazon because Amazon's not perfect, right? No company is perfect. But what Jeff Bezos and the S team and the leadership team at Amazon have done over the last few decades is it's remarkable. And so, I'm excited to tap into the expertise of our guest today, Steve Anderson. Welcome to the show.
Russ, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So most letters to shareholders from the CEO, I have to start with this. I'm
I
sorry.
know where you're going with
Yeah,
this, so
you've heard this, I'm sure. Most letters from CEOs to shareholders are boring. You want to run from those things. You decided to write a book about the letters from a CEO to his shareholders. Why?
Bezos is not just any CEO, I think, first. Second is writing and really what I call story or narrative is such a key part of Bezos and Amazon and kind of how it's grown and all of that. And literally, I was researching the impact technology is having on businesses and came up with this idea that the biggest risk they face is actually not taking enough risk. And so came across Amazon, started reading a couple of the letters, literally sat down and read all the letters. At the time there were 20 in order, right, kind of as a full narrative, and just was so impressed with how much knowledge, wisdom. I would call it secret sauce that Bezos talked about in his letters of how he has grown Amazon. That I became really intrigued with that, and the end result, as you say, is a book that was published on the letters.
So, what happened, Steve, that caused you to actually even start reading those letters and go, you know what, I need to steer my curiosity in this area toward Amazon?
I was researching companies that had made transitions well and ones that hadn't. And we know some of the names of those that didn't, Kodak and BlackBerry and Blockbuster and right, some of those. And we also know some names of companies that are known for being able to continue to experiment and invent, and certainly Amazon is in that category. So that's what led me to Amazon. And then again, I would say I stumbled across the letters as part of my reading and research and just became really intrigued with the information that was in there.
When was that?
It was probably a 3-year process of,
Like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 2 years
no, it was
ago?
probably about 4 years ago.
Okay. So
Yeah,
you dig up these letters and you start reading them and you go, wow.
that's pretty much what I did. And what's kind of interesting is my first, I guess, iteration was a white paper I created with just a one-page synopsis or summary of each of the letters that he had written, kind of key points, key quotes, key takeaways that I saw in each of those letters. And fortunately, my wife, who is my co-author, is in the book publishing business, and I showed it to her, and she said, "Oh no, this is a book. This is not a white paper." And so that's sort of the start of the writing the book process. Started from just me putting some thoughts down on what I thought was important.
Okay, let's start diving into these letters and what you've learned because I think there's so much wisdom that leaders of teams in any organization can learn from. I mean, if there's ever been a time where we need to adapt and change and adjust, I mean, hello, 2020, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
exactly.
the rate of change is remarkable. You talk a lot about the 97 letter.
Yeah, the very first letter. So they had their IPO in March of 1997. So the 97 letter came out in April of 1998. And really, he laid out in that letter his plan for growing Amazon. I mean, and I think what's really intriguing is that every letter since, he always attaches the 97 letter. So, and again, I came up with 4 cycles and 14 principles, but that is just an example of long-term thinking. That original 1997 letter, he still considers an important piece of his vision for Amazon.
I want to quote from. I might not get it perfect, but you'll be able to correct me. But one of the things that you share, I've heard you share this before, is these maybe three sentences from that 97 letter. At least I think it's the 97 letter. Steve, correct me if I'm wrong. It's not easy to work here. You can work long, hard, or smart, but you can't choose two of the three. Working at Amazon is something you can tell your grandparents about. That stood out to you, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. And that was in the 97 letter. And again, one of Bezos' characteristics is this ability to think really long term. And the point I make with that, and it was, we are building something that we will be able to tell our grandchildren about. That's the quote. Mm-hmm. And think about that. Literally, they're 4 years old now. They actually first started, the website came live in 1995. And so he's already
profitable. Are they at this point, Steve?
Oh no, they weren't profitable probably for the first 10 years or more.
So they're nothing. I mean, they're hardly anything.
Correct.
He's saying this is something you're going to tell your grandparents about.
Correct. And vision, long-term thinking, having an ability to look into the future. He was absolutely convinced the internet was unlimited opportunity. In fact, he still says that today, that it's his phrase, it's still day one for Amazon, for the internet, for what we're doing.
So I remember, in those early years, it wasn't that early, but I don't even know how many years ago. I distinctly remember sitting at my desk and making a decision to kind of like a little slush fund, some fun hobby money. I'm going to invest a little bit of money in some stocks today. I mean, it literally so small, it's not even going to make much of a blip. But I remember looking at Amazon and thinking, their stock's doing nothing. Mm-hmm. And I remember researching them a little bit, and they were getting pounded by the investment community and the financial reporters, the financial press, saying, because Steve Jobs was like, yeah, we're not turning a profit and we won't, and leave me alone.
Right.
How was he able to do that, Steve?
I think a couple things. Early on, he had some money coming in, and he raised first from his parents, right? The initial seed money, and then in that first year raised about $1 million from a number of different people, and he was convinced that it was a long-term play. And so he was not, and he lays this out in that 97 letters. We will make decisions for the long term, not short-term quarterly profits, period. And he was willing to go against conventional wisdom in order to pull that off. And all of the reason there wasn't profits is everything was being plowed back into developing this amazing logistics platform that now is paying off handsomely, right, for Amazon and its share owners.
So, and I think a lot of times we don't appreciate the battles he probably had to wage daily to keep those investors at arm's length and to keep convincing them. It sounds probably easy now, but any CEO or any senior executive of an organization that's taken on debt or outside funding knows those pressures. So that's pretty remarkable. Let's dive a little bit into the 14 leadership principles, because that's your book digs into those. Do you view that as really one of Amazon's major competitive advantages?
Yeah, I do. And let me be clear. So I talk about 14 growth principles that I see that Amazon used to grow. Mm-hmm. Amazon also has 14 leadership principles, and there are some overlaps between growth and leadership principles.
Like customer obsession, right?
Customer obsession, no question, right? It is a growth principle, but it's also a leadership principle, and perhaps one of the main ones. And I think as I think about it, the cycles I mentioned are test, build, accelerate, and scale. And one of the questions I had in terms of scale is, how in the world does a company grow to now almost 1 million employees and retain the culture? And he talks a lot about culture in the letters. He says culture, if you're trying to find your culture, you're discovering it, you're not making it. Culture is created over time, all of those kinds of things. But I think there's some very definite things, and the leadership principles are absolutely one of those keys. And in talking with former employees directly or reading about what they say, those leadership principles aren't just some plaque somewhere, but they are used every single day to guide decision making and what happens within the organization.
So apply that to leaders of other organizations. And I know we could take hours on this. There's so much to it, but just at a high level. So talking about the culture of Amazon that Jeff and his direct reports and the team he started to build years ago, what they've been able to do with culture, what are some takeaways that I as a leader can implement, whether I'm an entrepreneur, or I'm a mid-level manager leading a team of 10, or I'm the CEO of a major corporation?
Well, I think the first thing to think about is, am I being intentional about the culture I either want or already have created within the company? And if not, what can you do to be intentional? So 14 leadership principles are one of those things that are talked about every day, but there are several other things that Bezos has used, I think, to communicate. And that, again, is where writing comes in to play and is such an important component at Amazon. So, for example, the letters themselves all started out originally "Dear Shareholder," and then he shifted to "Dear Share Owner." And again, one of the principles is, if you want employees to act like owners, they actually have to be owners. So they have a very generous stock compensation and stock option plan, et cetera. And in fact, their salaries, while good, are not as high as other places. So they compensate based on the performance you make to help a company as a whole to move forward. One of the other thing is just symbols. One of the early symbols what's called a door desk. So early on, Bezos was on his hands and knees putting books into packages, and commented to the person next to him who was helping and saying, we've got to get knee pads because my knees are killing me on the floor. And the other guy said, no, we've got to get packing tables. And he said, that's brilliant. And he went to Home Depot and realized that they could buy an old door, some 4x4s and brackets, cheaper than they could buy tables and desks and some of those kinds of things. And that's still a symbol that is used in Amazon to remind people that if it doesn't benefit the customer, we don't want to spend money on it. Yeah. And a big fancy desk doesn't benefit the customer.
And things like the building that Jeff has worked out of being still called Day One, right?
Yep,
things like that.
Absolutely.
Lots of symbolism in their culture. I want to ask you about customer obsession for a moment. That leadership principle and what you see as a growth principle too. A lot of companies talk about customer service, right, Steve? Every company.
Yes.
How is it different at Amazon?
I think the word choice is absolutely intentional. There is a different weight behind obsession than there is customer service, customer experience, customer focus, customer journey. Obsession is just different, right? And he talks about over and over again that we start from the customer and work backwards. And so we invent on behalf of the customer. And in many cases, we invent things the customer doesn't even know they want. And again, easy example is Prime. Customers didn't know they wanted free shipping, but they certainly have embraced it. And certainly Amazon has too. And I would say literally, finally, other big retailers like Walmart and Target and, are trying to come up with their own version of Amazon Prime. But that is thinking about what can we invent on behalf of the customer, which I do think is a different mindset and requires you to operate differently when you start from that position.
It leads to, I see it as that shift. If you start with the customer and if you're customer obsessed, it's going to cause you to ask the right questions that lead to innovation and
Correct.
risk, right? I mean, it
Yes.
solves so much of that. Talk for a minute about ROR.
Return on risk. So ROI, every leadership, every business talks about, right? What's my return on investment? If I'm going to spend X amount of dollars in a marketing campaign, how many sales am I going to make? What we don't talk about, and I think this is the I guess interesting twist I bring because of my insurance and risk management background, is Bezos uses risk strategically, and he knows that you've got to risk in order to grow. So for Bezos, it's experimentation is key. And what he says is, if you know that experiment's gonna work, it's actually not an experiment. You've got to be able to fail. And the problem with large organizations is they have lost the ability, as he says, to suffer the consequences of failure long enough to be able to actually invent something new. And to me, that's that key. What risk can we take? And again, I've got to say, it's not stupid risk. It's not just throwing stuff against the wall. Amazon is very intentional about reducing risk whenever they can, but they aren't afraid of trying something new and having it fail. In fact, think about the times over the last number of years that you've heard Amazon, stop selling a product or remove it from the marketplace, or whatever they're testing and experimenting because it didn't work, or they're going to start over again with something new that they've learned in that experiment. And so that's key. And this whole idea, again, being the insurance guy, this whole idea of reducing risk, not increasing risk, is very different.
Is Amazon as long-term thinking now as they were in 97?
Yeah, I think so. And I will say, I think the pandemic has shifted that a little bit. Mm-hmm. Bezos was spending most of his time 3 to 5 years out. I think he has, because Amazon, I think, got caught like all of us did with delivery taking longer, right? All of those issues. And so I think he did come back into more of the day-to-day environment just to help get those problems solved. But I think he will go back. Let me give you an example of long-term thinking today. Amazon just got approval from the FCC for their Project Kuiper, which is their goal to send up into space 3,200 satellites to provide broadband, low latency internet access anywhere in the world. And they've committed $10 billion to do that. Well, that's probably going to take multiple years to see come to fruition. So, but they're willing to invest long term on what they consider to be big bets.
Well, I saw you post on LinkedIn the other day, Steve, about Amazon Care. I don't think that's something most of us have heard about. I mean, that might be another example too, right?
Yeah, no, I think there's no question. Amazon, Berkshire Hathaway, and JP Morgan, I believe, all are in a partnership to look at healthcare and see what they can do to help improve that. And that Amazon Care is a clinic basically for their employees to get less expensive and quicker access to healthcare for their employees.
So the more that you're way more of an expert on Amazon than I am. You've spent more time analyzing it, speaking about it, studying it. But even with the limited amount of time that I've been exposed to Amazon, and from the outside and the inside, every time I've walked away thinking, wow, Bezos is brilliant. Like, we think of Steve Jobs as brilliant, and he was, and Jeff Bezos is brilliant. And I don't know that a lot of people who are just viewing it pedestrian from the outside, I don't know if they really they really appreciate that. Here's my question. So when you think that about Jeff Bezos and you look at, and I don't want to spend much time on this, but I have to ask it, But then you look at his personal life over the last year.
Yep.
Is it easy to be disappointed, or do you not take that point of view?
Um, so I kind of go back to what you said earlier when we started. You may hate Amazon or love Amazon or Bezos, either way. I'm not judge and jury for him. I think he is brilliant and human. And so really the divorce, right? What all that, what year ago, January, this last January was right when we were finishing the manuscript, and we really talked a lot about, okay, how do we address this? Because up to that point, family man, married to Mackenzie for whatever number of years at that particular point. He, he stayed home in the morning to be with his kids. I mean, all of that.
Like 9 or 10 in the morning.
Yeah. And that his morning routine was not to be in early, and he doesn't, to my knowledge, to this day, doesn't take meetings before 10:30 in the morning. And he has said, my most important role as CEO of this company is to make 3 important decisions a day. That's it. Right. And so again, another interesting perspective, but what he does, how he thinks, his, I could just point of example after example, his 6-page narrative, in 2004, Bezos banned PowerPoint presentations at Amazon. And they actually, again, back to writing and narrative and story, the meetings where they need to make a big decision always start with a written document. It's called a 6-page narrative, maximum of 6 pages, going through kind of plus minus future press release, again, starting from the customer, right? 2 pizza teams, no team should be larger than what 2 large pizzas can feed them. I mean, you kind of see example after example after example of him thinking differently. Than what you normally expect.
Yeah, there are a lot of unique aspects to the Amazon culture that have proved to be a competitive advantage. The only reason I bring up, by the way, Bezos' personal life, I could care less about divorce or all the TMZ stuff. It's just as an observer and a student of his, I think, dang it, I hope he's not getting distracted. I hope that he's not. I hope his best days aren't behind him from a leadership and strategic standpoint. That's a debate probably for another show and another time. But
I agree.
Steve, there are a good number of books about Amazon, and I kind of joked to tease you at the beginning about you reading the letters and then publishing. Obviously, your book's so much more than just publishing the letters. By the way, Steve's book is called The Bezos Letters, and it's worth your time. It's one of the best books I think I've found on Amazon. And the other thing that I'd encourage everyone who's listening, not only read the book, but Steve, I'd encourage them to stay active following what you're learning, because this is the book is capturing at that moment what you had observed. But as you just shared here, there's some ongoing learning. So how do we do that? If someone's interested in following you or having you speak to their group or whatever that might look like, how do they find you?
Yeah, probably the best place to go is the book website, which is thebezosletters.com, and all kinds of information there in terms of kind of what I'm doing, et cetera. One of my latest projects was I actually watched the entire congressional testimony and really look again at what Bezos and how he put information together. And I want to read this one quote of his. It's still day one for this country, and even in the face of today's humbling challenges, I have never been more optimistic about our future. And I think that's a good message, this idea that, you know what, we are still in day one, and yeah, we've got problems, but let's work on them and address them and move forward.
No matter what you think about, to your point, no matter what you think about Jeff Bezos or what you think about Amazon, the good, bad, and the ugly, it's pretty, you can't really debate what Amazon has accomplished. It is remarkable. Steve, so many other questions I wish we had time for. Thank you so much for sharing your insight, your wisdom, what you've learned in this show. Appreciate it.
My pleasure, Russ. It's great to be with you.